I'm Scott Schiff with William Swig, and this is the Ayn Rand Fan Club. William, how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good, good. And I'm quite excited. Today we have a legend in the Ayn Rand world, Mr. James Valliant, author of Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics and Creating Christ with William Fahey. And we'll be getting into both of those later, but welcome, James, and thank you very much for being here.
Well, thank you very much. How are you guys doing? It's great to be here.
Absolutely. It's great to have you. I got to start at the outset and just thank you. You actually broke a lot of stereotypes that I had about ARI friendly people. Honestly, I had a lot of anger about some people at ARI over politics over the last 2 years. And, you've we friended each other and our interactions on social media debates. I just it helped pull me back from that anger even before the Peacock contribution became public. So I wanted to let you know that.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that it had that effect. Um,
Absolutely.
you are not the first person to be put off by certain Ayn Rand fans by any means. And, the intensity of what we went through last year in the political debate, it left me with the position that I really didn't care who one voted for. I was in that position. I mean, I could see virtue in Trump and I could see major vice in Trump, but also in Biden as well. My own emotional approach to the subject was if you couldn't see the negatives in your own candidate, you were kind of blinding yourself. On the other hand, I had no problem if people were going to vote Trump because they thought Biden would bring about. And let's face it, if it weren't for a 50-50 Senate and someone like Senator Manchin holding out for the filibuster, all kinds of radical change would be happening right now. They'd be changing the Supreme Court, they'd be adding states, they'd be getting us these new voting laws. So, yeah, we are on the edge of some radical change that was very, very scary with the prospect of Biden getting elected. And frankly, we're only one or two votes in the Senate from all of that radical change actually happening.
Yeah. I mean, for me, you were almost a test project for me. I was trying to convince you to vote for Trump all year.
Right.
And I don't want to say I blame you for Biden winning.
Well,
But
I
you
partly
were like a
responsible
test
because
case.
I wasn't one of those who voted for Biden, but I
Right.
have
No,
to
and
admit I was one of those who didn't vote for Trump either.
you were
So
just
to some extent, I am responsible. I mean, I cop to that freely.
I
And,
just felt
and,
like
and,
I
and
could have
so help
changed.
me, if those radical changes do happen, I might come to regret not voting for Trump. But
Well, that in itself is an honest attitude. You showed a certain objectivity, even among people that, didn't like Trump or that, within, I mean, I heard some of them, they would take it to then defend impeachment just because they hated the guy. But you were someone that you were still looking at impeachment, the first one, and saying, well, that's they're just trying to make political hay out of this, which was
oh, that was
obvious to anyone that wasn't
irresponsible.
just
Yeah.
against Trump and wanted to see him out of office for their own.
That was the shoddiest impeachment episode that Miss Pelosi put us all through, I think, in American history.
Yeah,
And
well, the
that
second
was,
one wasn't that much better.
and you just look at the rabid Trump hatred, which has caused the Biden administration to basically remove every executive reg that possibly can on immigration, energy, and now look at gas prices. And now, you know, I am pro immigration, but there can be no doubt that Biden is personally responsible for a humanitarian crisis with children that far exceeds any problem that existed under Trump that the media was, flipping out over. So this is the bed that everyone made when they went Biden in their, if they were doing it in their blind hatred for Trump.
Yeah, I agree. Well, let me just back up a little bit. I'm sure we'll get into politics as well, but
Okay, yeah.
I want to start
Interesting as
with,
that is.
if you
Well,
will,
Scott, let
go
me
ahead,
just
go
jump
ahead.
in and say, I also want to welcome James and thank you very much for coming on our show. I really appreciate it because I've read both your books and I like them a lot.
Well, thank you.
Um, I I was more of an orthodox objectivist when I read Passion of Ayn Rand's Critics, and I
Mhm.
really appreciated the time you spent in analyzing those biographies by the Brandens, because it helped me a lot in understanding where they were coming from and what sort of objective, what an objective look would, what an objective take you could make with regard to those books, and how it might help someone understand what was Rand's side of the issue.
That's what was desperately really needed. They had waited to come out with their memoirs and biographies until after Ayn Rand and her husband had died. So there was really no way to get Ayn Rand's perspective other than through, and I was privileged enough, Dr. Leonard Peikoff gave me full access to the Ayn Rand archives, and he allowed me to publish her private journal entries on Nathaniel Branden from the late 1960s, which really are her only way of speaking and responding to the Brandens beyond the grave. And I tried to analyze that as well as the biographies, as I had my own training as a trial attorney. And so what I was trying to do is make, in effect, an evidence case, a moral case, uh, basically making an argument in response. I obviously have no personal knowledge of this. My only information actually comes from the writings of Ayn Rand and the Brandens. So that being the case, all I could do is step back and analyze it as a lawyer would in terms of the credibility of the various witnesses.
Well,
Yeah, I
and
really appreciated that. I think we're going to get into your books later, but
Okay.
I think Scott wants to ask you about your history.
yeah, and I was someone who was probably more in the Kelly camp at the time the book came out, and I even wrote a review of it back in 2005. But I do want to start with your what is the James Valliant origin story? Growing up, how did you get into Rand?
Right. Well, I was born in the early 1960s in Los Angeles, a third generation Californian. So I'm basically a child of the 60s, teenager of the 70s. And I was raised with a sort of standard Protestant Christianity. My parents weren't particularly religious, but they took us to church thinking that was really the only way they could get their kids moral education, ethical instruction. They really knew no other forum for that, even though they themselves weren't particularly religious. However, as a little kid, I got into it. And I was reading the Bible and reading stuff way over my head when I was really a small child, actually. And I had, independent of Ayn Rand, a conversion to atheism in junior high school when I was about 12 years old. It was real overnight, and I went from basically being a Bible thumping Christian to being an atheist between seventh and eighth grades in school. And my politics were always sort of right of center. I would have described myself in the 70s as a Reaganite, an atheist for Reagan. And I understood that was there was a tension there, a paradox there. And someone actually approached me and said, well, you got to read Ayn Rand. Just figuring I would have, based on my opinions, that I would have something to maybe get from her. And so I did. And
This
I
was
read
a
her.
friend, this was a friend in high school.
Uh, this was actually an adult who I knew in high school. But I did have friends in high school who I got to read Ayn Rand, and they basically got converted along with me, even as teenagers. So we had a really remarkable high school experience that way. I have to say, Mike Berliner, the first executive director of the Ayn Rand Institute, said that their high school essay program was inspired by our particular high school's experience. Um, Kind of interesting for me to find out after the fact. But but I was reading everything. I was reading libertarianism. I was reading Murray Rothbard. I was reading Tibor Machan. I was reading all kinds of Austrian economics. I was reading other anti-communist writers, other secular atheist writers. So I wouldn't by any means call myself an orthodox objectivist at that point. When
Right.
I moved to New York City and started studying at New York University, I got to know many libertarians. I worked at Laissez-Faire Books, their actual storefront in Greenwich Village, as their weekend sales clerk, and got to know Murray Rothbard, the anarcho-libertarian. But I interviewed Nathaniel Branden. I was the first person to interview
I
Nathaniel
heard you
Branden
mention that.
after the death of Ayn Rand back in 1982. And then I was the person who sort of arranged for him to deliver, for the first time, the speech, The Benefits and Hazards of the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. It was in the question, he wanted me to screen the questions that we were being given one by one. And I didn't quite know why. And when we were done, I was asked the questions from the audience that came up in written form. And when it was all over and we were walking back to his car, he asked me, Jim, were there any questions you had to, censor out and screen out? And I said, well, there was only one. It seemed non-intellectual, and you denied it in 1968, whether you and Ayn Rand had an affair. He turns several different shades in front of my eyes in this thick, embarrassed silence that follows. And this is 4 years before Barbara Branden's book came out. So I already had my suspicions. I mean, in 1968, the Brandens had flatly declared there was no such affair to the world in their published essay response to Ayn Rand. And so to me, it was simply false because Branden had denied it. But at that point, then I had suspicions, the suspicions that the Brandens had not been honest with the world for many years now. And that was
Well,
confirmed.
I mean, no one admitted the affair, but
So,
well, no one really admitted the affair. I mean,
well, Ayn Rand never said it was or wasn't. She said he was, in her statement, he was guilty of dishonesty and other bad things in his private life and left it there. Nathaniel Branden was the one who mentioned that Ayn Rand came on to him, and in effect, the age difference made an affair impossible. Those were his exact words. So he explicitly said there never was such an affair. He denied it overtly. Ayn
to
Rand.
you,
Well, I'm sorry?
to you.
No, in his 1968 statement to the
Oh,
world.
but I mean, he would probably say he was trying to protect Rand.
No. Okay, so she came on to me, but I was nobly refused her because the
Well,
difference is
yeah, I
impossible.
mean, saying she
No, he
came on to
slammed
me.
Rand as hard as he could possibly slam her with a lie. This older woman just came on to me. He, in his memoir, makes plain he initiated the affair himself. And now in 1968, years later, 14 years later, he denies that any overtly, explicitly protect Rand.
Well, if
No, he was
anything,
protecting himself and
he's saying
slamming Rand as hard as he could.
in 68, in the wake of the break, he's saying, he's just saying whatever. And then by the time of his book later, he is coming out and admitting, yeah, I was the one who
Get
initiated.
the 1968 statement. Ayn Rand was pressing herself into my private life. Ayn Rand was asking me questions that were none of her business about my life. Whoa. That implies that she had no real reason to care or know that he was lying to her for 4 years, for example. And I can go on and on like that.
Well,
it was a tissue of lies in 1968 designed to protect himself and to accuse Ayn Rand of everything bad he could think of without admitting the affair that would point to his own guilt and dishonesty, and refute everything he was saying about Ayn Rand. The fact is, he solicited psychological counseling from Ayn Rand in late 1967.
but you
Ayn
say
Rand
he solicited it. I mean,
lied.
it was more like she
And
was.
so he's saying Ayn Rand's butting into my life after he asks Ayn Rand for her personal counseling on the matter.
I'm just not sure of that characterization. I think,
It was an issue of lies. He
but
denied that he was soliciting advice from Ayn Rand explicitly. He denied the affair, which would point to Ayn Rand's reason for inquiring, and he said she was just a nosy inquiring into my business. And then, of course, he flatly says this older lady came on to me, and I nobly refused.
I just think that a lot of it, I mean, his central lie to me is that he was no longer attracted to a woman that was older than him, that he still respected as a mentor and was in business with. And he didn't know how to deal with it.
His lies were much more than that and much deeper than that, as he himself admits. For years, he had been having profound intellectual differences with Ayn Rand that he was keeping from her, even as he was her paid spokesman. He was financially exploiting her all over the place.
I just don't know if that rises to the level of exploitation or if he was just confused and trying to work through it himself during that time.
Well, let me put it this way. There were things he says point blank about his doubts that he had, in my view, a moral obligation to clear up with Ayn Rand before he advocated her ideas.
I mean, yeah, I don't think anyone is saying that Branden is morally pure. I don't even think he would have said that.
Oh, no,
Uh,
but he never admitted that he lied about the affair, for example. And that was just a flat lie.
but I mean, he did admit it later.
He
That was
admitted
just how
that
he
there
was
was an
reacting in
affair.
'68.
He admitted there was an affair after Barbara Branden made it public to the world. Now, once the affair was known, the nature of why his deception would be immoral became just the romantic deception would be immoral. 4-year-long romantic deception would be immoral. And that they covered up from the world. The essence of his immorality to Rand was the reason for the lie, that there had been no affair. Barbara Branden realized that she was revealing something that would reveal that they had lied in 1968. I mean, when my confrontation with Branden after the speech, when he turned several colors, was, well, you, sir, had told us that there was no such affair. So, of course, there was no reason to ask the question. He just was silent. He knew he was caught in a lie, flatly, as I said that. He said there was no affair. Saying there was no affair covered up his wrongdoing.
And so
That
you're
was the purpose. And yet, by saying Ayn Rand came on to him, he was saying everything bad he could possibly say short of that about Rand.
I think that's just,
That's ugly distortion.
Sometimes in the details, you can remember things differently, and there's a process where, I mean, any kind of, who hit on who is one of those,
Well, there was no
was there
affair.
incidental
He had just
contact?
come off a 14-year affair with Ayn Rand, and he said there was no such affair explicitly. That was a factual lie that protected himself.
It was a lie, but
Rand as much as he could.
He believed he was. I believe he was trying. He was at least telling himself he was trying to protect Rand and keeping that secret.
Well,
from her.
if we can do that with any liar.
Well, yeah, that's true. That is absolutely
the liar
true.
had convinced himself of this delusion, but obviously it involves immorality and invasion.
But
I mean, I just look,
feel like
he said this old lady came on to me, and I nobly refused an affair. That was an ugly lie about Ayn Rand, revealing something about her. If he wanted to protect her, he could have not mentioned that she came on to him.
I also know that he wants to, I mean, he's telling his own side of the story. He's trying to, in the best way.
Memoir, he never talks about the '68 statement because he knows it was a lie.
Right.
So he never came
clean
on his lie.
Where we can read the statement.
I'm sorry?
Is there a place online where we can read the statement? Because I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I just would like to read the statement.
Yeah, when they were, I haven't checked recently, but when they were alive, it was on both Barbara Branden and Nathaniel Branden's websites. They published them. And they published them after, the memoirs came out, sort of to, respond to people like me saying those were lies. Now, they're both passed away. And I don't know if their websites are still operating, but it was privately circulated in answer to Ayn Rand. It was published and it was sent out to everyone on the Objectivist magazine mailing list because he kept the mailing list for his own purposes. And the other thing is clearly financially exploiting Ayn Rand. I mean, for years he was lying not only about the growing intellectual differences with Ayn Rand that he only explained after her death in that benefits and hazards speech. And he knew he was lying to her about personal issues, emotional issues. Now get this, he's a psychotherapist. He solicits psychotherapy counseling from Ayn Rand. And for months, he continues to lie about his private life. That psychological counseling that he solicited from Ayn Rand was a pack of manipulation.
Do you agree she shouldn't have participated in that? That she was too involved personally?
Well, by that point, their sexual relationship was over in her mind completely.
But she kind of wanted to rekindle it.
By the way, the Brandens suggest that the possibility of a romantic affair was still in her mind in '68 during the break. No, certainly by late '67, if not earlier, any intimate relationship was already closed and over in her mind. That was another lie the Brandens told in their memoirs.
I don't know that, you know, sometimes you say I'm over them and maybe you're not fully over them and you'd like to rekindle things if
Well,
they
it
were
would have
still
been nice
into
for
it.
the Brandens to have indicated that she told both of them that it was over by that point.
But that
Instead,
was
they hid that fact to make it seem like it was all about jealousy. No, Ayn Rand was simply trying to preserve, as her notes make explicit again and again, she was simply trying to preserve a professional relationship with him for months.
well,
In
well,
any event, she was reluctant to even give him the advice, but
well,
she did. And he was giving her a pack of lies in every single one of those sessions by failing to tell the most important. I mean, as a psychotherapist, he knows what manipulation and fraud is when the client is not being clean about the most important facts
but
of his private life.
all of it was still to me based on the idea that he was no longer attracted to her. He was having an affair. He knew it would destroy her if he told her.
It
And
did
you
not
know, I mean,
destroy her. That did not destroy her at all. It had nothing to do with jealousy. She suggested that he have an affair with someone else.
but I, you know,
Brandon's never told us that either.
but the
It
thing
wouldn't have been
is,
nice for the Brandons to tell us that Ayn Rand not what they did admit, as they had to, that Ayn Rand was constantly giving Branden outs because of the age difference.
but for that one,
For
I,
years,
I,
for years, she was saying I could understand the age difference, and he was saying no, Ayn, no, Ayn, no, Ayn.
I know because she said she could. I mean, I had a friend, a woman who did the same thing. She was even suggesting another affair for her husband as it became obvious that he really wasn't interested in her.
Well, but by that point, actually, her intimate relationship was over, and now she's saying, please maybe you should have an affair with someone else. So it wasn't jealousy, and the Brandons said it was. There's another lie they told us.
I
They implied that it was only at the point where where it became. They in fact suggest that it was the end of the affair that caused her to freak out. No, that was long over in her mind. She'd suggested other affairs for him in the meantime. He was manipulating her through all this dishonest counseling that he solicited. None of these facts were mentioned by the Brandons in their biographies. All of them are importantly relevant to Rand's moral and emotional status at the time.
I
They
just
distorted Rand, calling it a jealous, woman scorned thing when that had nothing to do with it.
I mean,
I
Point
agree with you,
blank.
James. I think the Brandons were manipulating Rand, so I'm on your side on that. But I want to try to take this in another direction if I can. Why do you think Rand was deceived by Nathaniel at first? Don't you think that she should have seen that she was dealing with someone who was trying to manipulate her?
Whew, that is a very complex question. To what extent is it up to us to penetrate a fraud's lies?
Yeah, like
To what extent is it our fault that we didn't detect the fraud? Now, in the beginning, let's be fair to Branden. In the beginning, I think he sincerely loved Ayn Rand and sincerely uh, admired her beyond all other humans and was truly moved by the Fountainhead. There were some disturbing aspects to his, fandom. He could, you could give him the line before and the line after, and he could quote you verbatim the line in between from the Fountainhead. A little disturbing. But Ayn Rand was utterly convinced of his sincerity at first, because I think at first he may have actually been fully sincere. But then, he took on the job of teaching her ideas and being a psychotherapist at the same time. He took on, without her permission or knowledge, this role of being sort of an enforcer psychologically. And so through psychotherapy, and boy, did I hear story after story, horror story, of how Nathaniel Branden misused his psychotherapy to manipulate people, broke all kinds of ethical codes.
oh, I agree. He was a hatchet man for the collective, and
And Ayn Rand
that
was
part.
largely in the dark about it.
Well, that part I quibble with. I think that it was almost like the two of them together almost created that environment.
I very much disagree. Ayn Rand herself was doing things to counter the sort of bad tendencies at the time, even that Branden was putting into it. And she, according to the folks that I spoke to, people like Robert Hessen, the historian Robert Hessen, he'd be in therapy with Branden. He'd be dating a new girl. He would be at a party. Branden is now revealing stuff that Hessen told him privately in therapy to Hessen's new girlfriend. Ayn Rand doesn't find out about crap like that until 1968, because people were afraid. Leonard and Robert Hessen and many others were afraid to tell Ayn Rand negative things about Branden. When she found out these stories, she was horrified. Horrified. She came out almost immediately with her essay, The Psychology of Psychologizing, where she stomped on the idea that you could ever morally judge someone for their emotions, much less their psychological issues, which she found out is exactly what Branden was doing. She would not have written that essay as a corrective had she not believed it was a necessary corrective to what Branden had been doing and what she had just found out.
One thing, that psychologizing essay has been misunderstood by many objectivists to mean that you can't ascribe motives to people. And she was really talking more about trying to guess what was in someone's subconscious without being a trained professional.
More than that, she believed emotions were a morally neutral thing, that you experience an emotion, and I mean any emotion. The experience of the emotion itself is not chosen. It's not volitional. It is an automatic physical response based on your previous thinking and programming of your subconscious. Therefore, no emotion as such is subject to moral evaluation. There are no moral shoulds and should nots in that sense about feeling the emotion.
I thought every is implies an ought.
Every is implies an ought. So the is of your emotion, and that's how you should treat it, as an is. The is of your emotion should give you one of two oughts. Do I need to correct this, or can I trust this? Now, if there's
First,
some
it's
kind
to
of
ask
psychological,
yourself, what is the emotion you're experiencing?
right? If I'm a
You need
pedophile,
to
I cannot
identify
act
that.
on it, and in fact, I have a moral duty not to act on it and to seek help before I hurt people with my emotions. So the question is my emotion a healthy one, consonant with the standard of life, the moral standard of life? So if I don't need to act on it. See, it's my conscious beliefs and actions which are within my volitional control, and therefore the only things that I can be morally judged good or bad for. An emotion is like your race. It's unchosen. Now, can we change our emotions? Yeah, but sometimes it takes a great deal of effort. Sometimes it takes psychotherapy. Sometimes we can't. So,
Yeah.
because of that, Ayn Rand was saying that to morally praise or condemn someone based on their emotions as such or their psychological state as such is always a mistake. And she believed Branden had been doing that left and right.
Yeah, I mean, I just that but even from whichever side you're on, yes, people came out of the woodwork after 68. Some of it was to kind of show a type of loyalty and support for Ayn Rand. So at that point,
Well,
many of them did dig out their horror stories.
But with horror stories like Hessen's, and I can repeat them over and over and over, that Ayn Rand had no knowledge of. Those were pretty horrible violations of ethics on the part of Mr. Branden.
I guess for me, it was, at least part of the issue was timing on your book. Had it come out right after Barbara's in 1986 and Nathaniel's in 1990, it would have seemed like a clear retort. But then, for the book to have come out in 2005, almost 20 years later, I think, you talked to Kelly about the vitriol you got for it. I mean, I think it was taken as a signal that the Institute hadn't moved on. And that wasn't, you were doing it independently.
Quite independently. I did not consult the Ayn Rand Institute, the estate of Ayn Rand, or Leonard Peikoff, who I knew well by that point, before I posted online what is in effect part one of the book, my critique of Barbara Branden's biography. And I just went, and the reason I did that is because Leonard Peikoff had said, look, I knew these people, I know them to be liars. And so therefore, I have no interest in reading or going into their books. It's simply on the basis of the fact that he was the first cousin of Barbara Branden.
Right.
He knew Nathaniel Branden very well. He knew they were lying to him. he discovered the lies that they had told him. I mean, Barbara Branden was just telling people two different sets of of alleged truths, and she was caught when both groups suddenly met each other. Said, "No, you were telling us all this. No, you were telling us all this." And Leonard Peikoff said, Barbara Branden just went upstairs and moved out of the apartment building that day, quietly, without telling anyone, because she was just nailed in the lies she was telling people. So Peikoff said, "I have no interest in analyzing Barbara Branden. She's a liar. I know that personally, and let me tell you that." So since he regarded it as arbitrary and not worth responding to, there was no official response, although Peter Schwartz did write a more detailed response to it. And it was a fair response, but not as detailed as I think it could have and should have been.
Yeah.
And I, frankly, from the first time I read, I mean, you should see the notes of my first copy of her book. All the margins are filled in and underlined. This contradicts this page and this page and this page. And so I delineated the vast array of absurd contradictions about Ayn Rand that Barbara Branden spills out. And I think that was one of the more effective parts of the book. I mean, she'll say, one thing on one page and just exactly the opposite on, 3 pages later about Ayn Rand.
I guess
over and over and over again.
I just see it, and I want to be fair because, I mean, part of my issues with the book were that, it was a prosecutor's case, and that, I mean, to be fair to you, it wasn't called an objective analysis of the Brandens. You weren't looking for their mitigating issues and things that they might have been thinking about.
That is correct. I was not looking for their mitigating issues. I believe that the mitigating issues had so vanished to the shrinking point by that point that since they had an opportunity to give their side, that what was required was Ayn Rand's side, forthrightly.
And
I happen to think that Ayn Rand's side is correct. I mean, on the one hand, you can't say, the need to touch and be touched was alien to Rand on one page. And then on 3 pages later say, "I'll never forget the touch of her hand whenever something was troubling me, or her blowing me a kiss whenever I left the room." It's like, what?
Well,
is that the same person?
It's still
Actually a contradiction.
But yes, in a sense, but I can relate to people that, they may be weird about touching, but yes, they can still have their own.
Ayn Rand was not. Ayn Rand hugged, kissed, touched hands,
yeah,
blew kisses. How's your premises? And yet, with all of that experience, all that hand touching, all that hugging, Barbara Branden can say the need to touch and be touched was alien to Ayn Rand, her exact words. That's a lie. Now, she's lying to herself maybe too, but that doesn't fix the lie. She knew that Ayn Rand was not like that. She had many, many counterexamples.
But see,
she goes so far as to say it was alien to her.
It's when you say they knew. I mean, she's offering her interpretation.
I'll never forget the touch of her hand whenever something was troubling me. The need to touch and be touched was alien to Rand.
Yeah, but I mean,
look, contradictions.
If I mean, anyone can nitpick something to try to.
I mean, nitpick.
I believe that
she experiences herself all this touching from Rand, and then says it never happened.
I just think that is the type of, it's not a contradiction, but it can exist in a person that maybe, is weird about touching, but can
respect
touch.
for
I don't know if it's true or not. I don't know the woman.
Barbara Branden will say at one moment, the appreciation for personal context was alien to Rand. She was demanding, dogmatic, came to snap judgments that she never altered. She never appreciated anyone's personal context. On one page. On another page, she'll say, "I will never forget all of those many sunlit walks in which she showed a non-judgmental understanding of my context and needs."
Yeah, I mean,
what? The lady is so deeply confused and so deeply self-deceiving that she can't tell a coherent story. Now, either Ayn Rand was many times appreciative of her personal context, or Ayn Rand never, ever appreciated another person's personal context.
Maybe it was sometimes.
Lay out two exact extremes.
But
they both cannot. The law of contradiction.
If they're in a bad mood.
I mean, the law of non-contradiction, which Barbara Branden presumably still believes in still holds. You cannot both be absolutely ignorant all the time of everyone's personal context and then have all of these many sunlit conversations in which you showed a non-judgmental understanding of my context and needs.
I mean, here's an example for you. I feel like sometimes you use Barbara as a character witness against Nathaniel to prove his deceptions, but yet
Very
you've
much
called.
so. They're full of contradictions against each other.
So you're able to kind of at least believe she's telling the truth when it is supporting your, the point you're trying to make.
No, I'm very careful. In fact, I'm very careful in The Passion of Ayn Rand's critics to say that when I do that, I am not necessarily saying that what is said in the Branden books, either of them, is true or false. Sometimes Mr. Branden says things that are uncomfortable to Barbara Branden that sound like truths that she could have revealed. For example, her own list of affairs. She said, I was just the victim of my husband's affair with Ayn Rand. Poor me, poor me. Oh, well, before her husband had an affair with Ayn Rand, she had been cheating on Branden repeatedly. And she continued to have other affairs. Now, that would have put her own victimhood in context, and she kind of left that out. Branden had to remind everyone. Branden also reminded everyone that Barbara Branden was screaming about how she was still a victim of Ayn Rand years later on the eve of the release of her biography. Of course, that shows her to be less than objective, but of course, she leaves that stuff out. So, and as there's stuff that Branden left out, didn't want told, that he sort of contradicts what he said. Yep. And the mere fact of the contradiction is interesting. Now, I tend to believe one end of the other on the other, one more probable. They're both liars, so neither can be trusted from the outset about this subject because their own personal reputations are on the line. So they are biased witnesses defending themselves in those memoirs.
I do believe they're defending themselves.
And putting stuff in that'll make themselves look better. And leaving stuff out that'll make them look worse.
I mean,
that's just obvious on the face of it.
That's in general, that is how people present themselves. It's not.
I've done personal presentations of myself where I was able to say, look, I was in error, and no, this is what I did. I have never, what the Brandens did in their biographies is something that I would find personally offensive if anyone did that to someone else I knew in their memory. I would not, in other words, even had I fallen out with Ayn Rand, I would not have lied, deceived, given half the story, left out data that would have been crucial to my point. No, that's dishonest. Over and over and over again.
Sometimes I feel like objectivists just use a generalized, they're dishonest as a way of saying, don't talk to that person anymore.
Well, no, I think you have to. Ayn Rand is very careful about saying you cannot judge people if you do not have the factual context to back it up. And here, I'm afraid, we have not only a factual context, but consider the very dimensions that Ayn Rand considered important in making a contextual moral evaluation. And in fact, her notes show just how reluctant she was to come to a negative moral evaluation about the Brandens. To judge, she specifically says, to judge, I must know. To judge, I need more facts. I don't know. And she keeps asking, and he keeps lying and hiding the truth. Month after month after month.
But it was all the same. He was
characterologically dishonest.
It was that he was no longer attracted to her.
He was gaining the fat living that Ayn Rand could give him for many years, knowing that he was lying to Ayn Rand. He was financially exploiting her by lying systematically to her for years.
Yeah,
He lied about more than one subject to her, and then he lies to the world about the break in '68, denying there was ever such an affair at all. And then in their biographies, they lie, 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 lie. No, we're talking about characteristic liars. We're not talking about one or two little lies. We're talking about systematic liars, and it goes deep in their character. Self-deception may be involved as well.
When I read the books, it didn't make me, hate Rand, it didn't make me want to get out of the movement. Sometimes people's reactions to it did.
Right. No. because they in their books have to lard it with all kinds of praise of Ayn Rand too, because they have to show that they were sucked in for a reason.
Maybe that part was genuine.
Well, as I say, neither the positives nor the negatives can really be trusted, precisely because of their sort of manic bipolar duality. Ayn Rand goes from being, Barbara Branden, the way she even describes it, Ayn Rand was the greatest of geniuses, the most passionate of people, the most rational of people. On the other hand, she was this monster, in effect. Wow. That kind of bipolar evaluation should itself signal a red flag, all of us, that we're not looking at an objective analysis.
I think
But
some of
a
the
personally motivated one from someone who was personally involved.
it's just the nature of relationships. Only someone close to you can betray you or have kind of you start to get into relationship patterns where it's
Well,
unhealthy.
let me put it this way. If I had an affair with someone for 4 years and then publicly and lied to the person I was having the affair, that I was cheating on, lying for 4 years to the person I was cheating on. And then when the affair broke up, I said, no, there was never any affair. Oh, she did come on to me though, but I nobly refused. Okay, I would have sheer contempt for anyone who did that to anyone.
But yet
Ayn Rand was keen about being honest with everyone who was relevant at the time. Her husband, Branden's husband. He knew how important honesty was to her, and he lied to her about that for years, and then denied it to the world, putting as much blame on her as he could. That is a despicable lie. It is not only cheating on your partner dishonestly, which is the difference for Ayn Rand, morally speaking, but it was lying to the world about it and putting as much blame on Ayn Rand as he could without putting any blame on himself. That is a knowing lie, a conscious lie, lies sustained for years, and multiple lies. We're talking about self-conscious, characterological lies that caused harm to a woman that they claim to admire for her courage, standing up to the world with her ideas. No, they hurt this great woman. So
we know they hurt her. They hurt her while she was alive. I mean,
right. Well, because they were lying to her.
But yeah, I agree they were lying, but I just believe there was one central lie, that Branden was no longer attracted to her. And I believe that she intimated to him that it would destroy her if he told her that.
The not attracted is, well, we'd have to open up Branden's mind to know when that changed in his mind, because he wasn't honest with Rand about that for sure. But there's a little other fact there.
Yeah,
an actual affair.
I mean, again, it was not.
He was sleeping with someone else for years and didn't tell his sex partner.
Well,
how about that as a lie?
It
wasn't, I'm not attracted to you, Ayn. I'm sleeping with this Patricia, and I've been doing so for 4 years.
Yes, it would have been better for everyone if he had been honest at the time. I agree. And again, I'm not here to defend the Brandens.
Break. If he's going to mention the affair, say, well, okay, yes, I had an affair and cheated on Ayn Rand. I was honest about that with everyone, but then cheated on Ayn Rand for 4 years, because that would have been what he would have had to have said.
You think she wanted him to come out with the affair in '68?
No, he could have done, well, he could have, if he's going to mention the affair, which he did, it was then his positive obligation to say why. That gave her a right. She wasn't just nosing in on my business. I solicited the counseling. I lied through the counseling. I lied about having an affair for 4 years. All of that would have been relevant and obvious had he told the truth to the world. No, this was systematic dishonesty to protect himself and to put as much blame on Rand as he possibly could, without admitting the truth that would reveal his own immorality.
I just don't think he was just trying to hurt Ayn Rand per se, or he would have come out with the affair. I think that both
he could have left Barbara out of it,
fairly or unfairly.
He mentioned the affair only to hurt Ayn Rand. Oh, that is to say that Rand wanted an affair.
So wait, he did mention it in '68?
At the end of his statement in '68, he said, Ayn Rand has not told you the real reason for the break. The real reason for the break is that she wanted an affair with me, but the age difference made that impossible. So He said, Ayn Rand came on
He
to me,
didn't tell
but I
about the
double
affair.
refused.
He used very general language to
General
say his
language, he
summary.
said explicitly, Ayn Rand came on to me and there was no affair. It was impossible.
He said Ayn Rand wanted an affair with me, which was, I mean, that kind of happened where they.
Yeah, he initiated. He admits in his
I don't
memoir,
know if that's
initiated the
even
affair
if he
that
admitted
lasted for
that. I don't
14
know
years.
if it's
Dude,
if that's
dude. If you're going to tell me his assertion that the age difference with Rand made the affair impossible,
no,
as
they had an
a
affair.
denial of what happened, that would have
What
implicated his lies, his cheating on Rand, then I have to say you're really missing the basic here. He not only cheated on Ayn Rand, he told the world a falsehood about it. Ayn Rand came on to me, but the affair was impossible because of the age difference. That is a factual lie designed to put every blame he could possibly put on her
if you go
without
to
taking any blame of himself. He didn't have to mention the affair at all.
the Clintons taught me to parse words, and what he's saying is that
Clinton, what is.
Yeah, but
That's
what he's saying is that Ayn Rand wanted an affair, and from his recollection, that she wanted it, and that's kind of how it came to be. Even
the moment he says that, he has an obligation to say, "So did I, and we did."
I agree. He could have worded the statement
without saying that. He's lying.
But that's
adding it's impossible.
He's saying the age difference.
Further.
When he's saying the age difference was impossible, he's saying that's how it turned out. The age difference was impossible.
Ayn Rand wanted an affair, but the age difference made it impossible. Explicitly says no affair happened.
Oh, he says no affair happened?
No, the phrasing says no affair happened.
It could be
There is no other way to fairly interpret that. He is morally obliged at that point.
She wanted an affair.
Happened.
Well,
he is lying. He is saying it never happened because it was impossible.
It's I just think that there's a characterization.
You are now sounding like Bill Clinton, saying, "Well, it depends. You said you didn't have sex with that woman. Well, it depends on what the definition of meaning of is." No, that's insane. When the man says the real reason, Ayn Rand did not tell you the real reason. This is the real reason. Start there. He's obliged now to tell that he was involved in the real reason.
Yeah,
but no, he did not.
I agree. He handled it badly.
Lie designed to mislead the readers.
Yeah, I think he was trying to protect himself.
And nor did Miss Branden. They lied in their memoirs about that lie. And there's no other way to look at that. But
I mean, nobody's saying they didn't lie. It just with the nature of it, and were they trying
to point this out? None of the defenders of the Brandens ever noticed this little fact.
Well, I think most of them do. No one, I don't think
anyone
claims Branden is perfect.
It would have been nice for someone to have mentioned that the Brandens were public liars to the public as early as 1968 about these matters, and that it might affect their credibility as biographers.
I just think that in terms of, these what you're saying she lied about whether they coordinated their story about her being an anti-Semite or something like that. It just gets into, you were trying to make the case that they're liars. And I think you have done that. I think if you tried to pick most people apart and get into all their public statements, you can find contradictions. And I don't even mean to defend them by saying that.
Not like that. No. Anything that stinks like that is a lie. If I said, take anything and put the phrasing that same way. Scott didn't tell me the real reason for for the reason why he borrowed money from me. I'll tell you the real reason why he borrowed money from me. It was because he was involved in some financial fraud somewhere. I wasn't involved in that financial fraud. It was impossible for me.
I'm not completely sure that's analogous, but
I just say this is the real reason, but such a reason made it impossible for me to participate. I have lied to the world. That was not the real reason. A partial lie is the worst kind of lie.
That's most lies.
Kind of lie.
Most people lie about their motives more than the actual things they do.
Yeah, and he was lying about facts that he knew. And Barbara Branden joined in those lies that she knew.
I believe they were trying to be honest, and you can say that they were lying and they contradicted themselves, and I mean, I think that's fair. We diverted a little bit from the origin story.
Right. But my origin story, the only really complete that is, well, I guess we've covered it even here.